sleepy history of gardens, herbs, and walled courtyards. Chapter 1: The Opening Card and the Quiet Gate. Before we begin, imagine the video opening with a simple card on the screen. Perhaps it is a soft illustration of a garden wall at dusk, a little wooden gate, and a few pale herbs growing beside a path. The title rests there quietly for a moment, and then, after this opening card, the picture slowly fades to dark. From there, we can let the story continue in a gentle way, without needing much from the eyes. The garden can become something listened to rather than watched. A place made of words, soft footsteps, old paths, and leaves moving in the evening air. Tonight, we are going to wander through the long history of gardens, herbs, and walled courtyards. Not as a story of conquest or grand drama or urgent discovery, but as a slow walk through human attempts to make small, ordered spaces within a very large world. A garden is often a modest thing. It may be no more than a few plants near a doorway, a pot of mint on a sill, or a patch of earth protected from wandering animals. Yet gardens also carry memory. They remember climate, soil, custom, food, medicine, fragrance, prayer, rest, and the steady human wish to shape a little piece of nature without entirely taming it. A wall, too, can be a quiet object. It keeps out the wind. It marks a boundary. It gives shade at certain hours of the day. It turns an open space into an inner one. A wall can make a courtyard feel like a room beneath the sky. Within such walls, people have cooked, talked, planted, swept, watered, repaired tools, dried herbs, taught children, and rested during the hot part of the afternoon. The history of gardens is not one history, but many. There are river gardens where irrigation channels once glimmered in the sun. There are palace gardens with formal walks and reflecting pools. There are monastery gardens arranged for usefulness and contemplation. There are kitchen gardens, physic gardens, orchard gardens, herb beds, cloister walks, shaded patios, and courtyards where vines climb over wooden frames. Some were made by rulers and scholars. Many more were made by ordinary hands, season after season, for food, scent, shade, and comfort. To follow this history, we will move slowly. We will begin near the earliest settlements, where people learned to keep useful plants close at hand. We will pass through ancient river valleys, Greek and Roman courtyards, Persian and Islamic gardens, medieval monastery herb beds, and the enclosed gardens of later Europe. We will listen for the soft names of herbs: rosemary, sage, thyme, mint, fennel, lavender, rue, basil, dill, coriander, chamomile. We will notice how many of these plants traveled, how seeds moved in pockets and ships and saddlebags, how cuttings were exchanged between neighbors, and how knowledge was kept in recipes, remedies, and remembered practice. A garden changes according to the hour. Morning belongs to dew and small sounds. Noon belongs to heat and shade. Evening belongs to fragrance, when certain herbs release their scent more strongly, and warm stone gives back the sun it has stored. History, too, can be approached by hour, not as a bright, crowded procession, but as a long afternoon fading gradually toward night. So let us enter by a quiet gate, approach is simple. The path is narrow. There is a low wall, warm from the day. Beyond it, in the dimness, are beds of herbs, a cistern, a fruit tree, and the faint outline of a courtyard open to the sky. We will walk slowly, and we will begin with the first gardens that were not yet gardens in the formal sense, but places where human beings started to notice that a seed, protected and remembered, could return as food, medicine, and shade. Chapter 2. First planted places. Long before gardens had names, before they had plans or walls or written descriptions, people understood plants through gathering. They knew which leaves could be eaten, which roots were filling, which fruits came at a certain season, which bitter plants might soothe the stomach, and which should be avoided. This knowledge was not abstract. It was carried in the body and in the community. It came from looking closely, returning to the same places, watching animals, tasting carefully, and passing information from hand to hand. When people began to settle more permanently in certain places, useful plants followed them. Some grew from discarded seeds near hearths and camps. Some were deliberately encouraged. A patch of grain might be protected. A fruiting shrub might be cleared around so that it received more sun. A plant with a pleasant smell or practical use might be moved closer to where people lived. This was not yet gardening in the later sense of ornamental beds and planned enclosures. It was a gradual change in relationship. Instead of only going out to find plants, people began bringing plants in. A dwelling and its surrounding ground became part of a living system. The edge between wild and cultivated softened. In the ancient Near East, in the regions of the Fertile Crescent, people cultivated cereals such as wheat and barley, along with lentils, peas, flax, and other useful crops. In time, orchards and vineyards became part of settled life. Fig trees, date palms, pomegranates, olives, and grapes were not merely food sources. They were living investments. To plant a tree was to imagine a future season, and often a future generation. The earliest planted places were practical, but practicality does not exclude beauty. Anyone who has seen young barley rippling in wind, or a fig tree spreading its leaves beside a mud brick wall, knows that usefulness can be beautiful without trying. A patch of herbs near a doorway might have been valued because it could flavor a meal or help preserve food, but it also brought scent and greenness into daily life. Water was central from the beginning. In dry regions, a garden could only exist where water could be gathered, guided, or lifted. A spring, a riverbank, a seasonal flood, or a well changed what was possible. Irrigation was not just an engineering practice, it was a way of extending the reach of care. A channel of water made a line of green. A basin kept moisture near roots. A wall reduced wind and protected tender plants. The idea of enclosure also developed naturally. People fenced plots to keep animals out. They built walls for shelter and security. They made courtyards between rooms, because a house surrounding an open space could be both inward-looking and practical. In warm climates especially, the courtyard became a kind of outdoor room, shaded at different times of day, easier to cool, and protected from dust and strong winds. The first gardens were not separate from everyday labor. They were part of cooking, healing, fuel gathering, animal keeping, washing, weaving, and storage. Herbs might be hung to dry from rafters. Seeds might be saved in jars. Leaves might be crushed, steeped, burned, bundled, or scattered. The knowledge of plants lived with the routines of the household. We should imagine these early gardens humbly, not as perfect rectangles seen from above, but as lived-in spaces. A doorway, a grinding stone, a clay pot, a shaded corner, a little patch of bitter greens, a vine trained where it could climb, a tree whose fruit ripens slowly, children learning which leaves are for goats and which are for the cooking pot, elders remembering what was planted in a dry year and what survived. In these places, the garden was less an escape from life than a concentration of it. It gathered food, medicine, work, memory, and hope in a small piece of ground. And perhaps that is one of the oldest meanings of a garden, not luxury, not display, but nearness. Useful life brought near, water brought near, shade brought near, a bit of the wider landscape invited into the circle of home. Chapter 3: River Gardens of Mesopotamia and Egypt. As settlements grew along great rivers, gardens became more deliberate. Rivers of Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates, flowed through lands where irrigation made agriculture possible on a large scale. In Egypt, the Nile's annual rhythm shaped fields, orchards, and garden spaces for thousands of years. These river civilizations left some of the earliest written and visual evidence for gardens, showing us that cultivated green spaces had become objects of planning, pleasure, ritual, and status. In Mesopotamia, water channels were the quiet foundation of garden life. The landscape could be dry and demanding, but with canals and careful labor, fields and orchards flourished. Date palms were especially important. They gave fruit, shade, fiber, and building material. Beneath the high canopy of date palms, other plants could grow in partial shelter. This layered planting, tall palms above, fruit trees below, vegetables and herbs nearer the ground, made efficient use of space, light, and moisture. The garden, in such a setting, was often a managed shade. Step under palms from the open sun would have been to enter a different temperature, a different sound. Leaves overhead, water moving in channels, insects, birds, damp soil, and the smell of fruit and earth. Even when the surrounding world was hot and bright, the garden could create a pocket of relief. Ancient texts from Mesopotamia mention gardens connected with temples, palaces, and estates. Some were productive orchards. Others carried symbolic meaning, representing abundance and divine favor. Kings boasted of planting exotic trees and collecting plants from distant regions. Yet behind such formal accounts were gardeners, water carriers, diggers, pruners, and those who knew how to keep trees alive through heat and drought. In Egypt, garden images appear in tomb paintings and models. These gardens were often shown with remarkable order: rectangular pools, rows of trees, vines, beds, and walls. The pool might contain fish, lotus, or papyrus. Around it might grow sycamore figs, date palms, dom palms, pomegranates, and grapevines. The walled garden was both practical and symbolic. It protected growth, organized space, and created a private world of shade and water. Egyptian houses, especially those of the well-to-do, could include gardens or courtyards. Even modest households might keep useful plants in available spaces. Temples had sacred precincts with trees and pools. The garden could be a place of offering, rest, and continuity. In tomb imagery, gardens sometimes seem to accompany hopes for the afterlife, an eternal place of cool water, fruit, and shade. The lotus and papyrus held special importance in Egyptian visual culture, but everyday herbs and plants mattered too. Garlic, onions, coriander, cumin, lettuce, dill, and fenugreek were among the plants known in ancient Egypt. Some were used in food, some in medicine, some in ritual or preservation. The ancient Egyptian relationship with plants was practical and deeply observant. Medical papyri list remedies involving plant materials, though we should read them gently, as part of historical knowledge rather than modern instruction. A walled Egyptian garden might have been entered through a gate, its interior laid out with straight paths. In the center, a pool reflected the sky. Trees stood in rows, their roots watered by hand or by irrigation. Vines might be trained on trellises, creating shade. The wall made the garden legible, almost like a drawing. Inside, order and moisture; outside, the wider dry land. But even formal gardens were not motionless. Leaves dropped. Water needed lifting. Silt gathered. Trees had to be tended. Birds came and went. A pool warmed in the sun and cooled at night. Garden history is often preserved in plans and paintings, but the living garden was always changing. The river garden teaches us something simple and enduring. Where water can be guided, green life gathers. The sound of water in a channel or basin is one of the oldest garden sounds. It is not dramatic. It does not hurry. It simply continues, if maintained. The gardener's task is to keep it moving where it is needed. Along the Nile, the Tigris, and the Euphrates, people learned to make gardens as small climates. A wall, a channel, a tree, a pool. Together they softened heat, sustained herbs, and created places where human beings could rest under leaves. In the long history of gardens, this may be one of the most persistent dreams. A cool, ordered place within a bright and thirsty world. Chapter 4. Greek herbs, sacred groves, and household courtyards. In the Greek world, gardens took several forms. There were sacred groves associated with gods and local traditions. There were orchards and vineyards, essential to rural life. There were vegetable plots and herb beds, modest but valuable. And there were courtyards within houses, where everyday domestic life unfolded around an open center. The Greek word pairidaēzos, borrowed from Old Persian, later came to be associated with enclosed parks and gardens. But Greek planted spaces were often simpler. The landscape of Greece, with its hills, rocky soils, bright light, and varied microclimates, encouraged a close knowledge of hardy plants. Olive trees, vines, figs, and aromatic herbs became part of both economy and identity. Herbs such as oregano, thyme, mint, sage, fennel, anise, coriander, and parsley were known and used in cooking, medicine, and ritual. Many of these plants thrive in dry, sunny conditions. Their small leaves and strong oils are adaptations to heat and limited water. To brush past wild thyme or oregano on a hillside is to release scent. The Greek landscape itself was, in many places, a kind of herbal text, aromatic and resilient. Greek physicians and writers paid attention to plants. Hippocratic writings mention diet and remedies, including plant-based preparations. Later, Theophrastus, often called the father of botany, wrote carefully about plants in works such as Inquiry into Plants. He described differences in trees, shrubs, herbs, roots, seeds, cultivation, and habitat. His approach was observational. He asked how plants grew where they grew and what distinguished one from another. This habit of observation belongs naturally to gardening. A gardener must notice which plant prefers sun, which wilts first, which soil holds water, which herb becomes stronger if cut back, which seed takes well to being saved. Greek plant knowledge grew from farmers, herbalists, physicians, cooks, and philosophers alike. It was not confined to one profession. The Greek house often centered on a courtyard. This open space admitted light and air. It was a place for household work, storage, conversation, and movement between rooms. Depending on wealth and region, it might include potted plants, a small altar, a well, or shaded areas. Even when not a garden in the formal sense, the courtyard created the conditions for small-scale cultivation. A pot of herbs, a vine, a tree, a swept surface with a patch of shade. Greek sanctuaries sometimes included groves, springs, and planted areas. These were not always gardens designed for strolling in the later ornamental sense, but they show the deep association between plants and sacred presence. A grove could be protected because it belonged to a deity. A spring could gather offerings. Trees could mark continuity across generations. The idea of the garden as a place for thought also has roots in the Greek world. Philosophical schools met in shaded walks, gymnasia, and groves. Plato's academy was associated with a grove outside Athens. Epicurus taught in a garden, and his school became known simply as the garden. This was not a garden of spectacle, but of conversation, friendship, moderation, and reflection. The image is gentle. People gathered in shade, speaking quietly about how to live. The Greek garden, then, is partly a place of utility and partly a place of thought. It holds herbs for the kitchen, plants for medicine, trees for food and oil, groves for reverence, and courtyards for domestic life. Its beauty is often dry, aromatic, and sunlit. Not lush in the way of river valleys, but spare and fragrant. If we walk through an imagined Greek courtyard at the end of the day, we might notice the stone floor cooling slowly. A clay jar stands near a wall. A vine leaf casts a shadow. Somewhere nearby, bread is being prepared with oil and herbs. The scent of thyme drifts from a bundle hung to dry. The courtyard is not grand, but it is central. The house turns inward toward it, and above it, the sky deepens from blue to violet. In such a place, the garden is not separate from philosophy, food, medicine, or daily rhythm. It is a small environment for living attentively. That attentiveness, the careful noticing of plants, seasons, and shade, will travel onward into Roman gardens, herbals, monastery cloisters, and many later forms of cultivated calm. Chapter 5: Roman Courtyards, Peristyles, and the Herb Garden at Home. The Romans inherited and adapted many garden traditions from the Greeks, Etruscans, Egyptians, Persians, and peoples across the Mediterranean. In Roman life, gardens appeared at many scales. There were great villa gardens with terraces and views. There were urban house gardens enclosed by colonnades. There were kitchen gardens, orchards, vineyards, and small plots tended by ordinary families. There were also courtyards that brought light, air, and greenery into densely built towns. The Roman house, especially in its well-known urban form, might include an atrium near the entrance, and farther within, a peristyle garden. The peristyle was an open courtyard surrounded by columns. At its center could be a planted space, a fountain, a basin, a sculpture, or carefully arranged beds. In warmer regions, this inner garden created a cool, private world. Rooms opened onto it. The household moved around it. It was both ornamental and practical, a source of light, air, and pleasure. At Pompeii and Herculaneum, preserved by volcanic ash, archaeologists have found remarkable evidence of Roman gardens. Root cavities, pollen, seeds, wall paintings, and garden layouts help reconstruct what grew there. Some houses had small courtyards painted with garden scenes, extending the illusion of greenery beyond the real space. Walls might show birds, fountains, fruit trees, and trellises. Even where a courtyard was small, painting could make it feel expansive and leafy. Roman gardeners used plants for scent, shade, food, medicine, and display. Roses, violets, lilies, ivy, myrtle, laurel, plane trees, cypress, box, rosemary, and many fruit trees were known. Herbs such as rue, savory, mint, coriander, dill, fennel, parsley, thyme, and basil had culinary and medicinal roles. The Roman kitchen garden, or hortus, was once a deeply practical space. In early Roman tradition, the garden plot near the house was associated with simple self-sufficiency: vegetables, herbs, and fruits for the household. Writers such as Cato, Varro, Columella, and Pliny the Elder recorded agricultural and botanical knowledge. Their works are varied, sometimes practical, sometimes encyclopedic. Columella wrote on farming and gardens, including the care of vines, trees, vegetables, and bees. Pliny collected vast amounts of plant lore in his Natural History. These texts preserve elite voices, but they also draw on older, broader traditions of practical knowledge. Roman gardens could be highly designed. Wealthy villa owners shaped landscapes with terraces, water features, clipped hedges, shaded walks, and views toward countryside or sea. The garden became a place for dining, reading, conversation, and demonstrating cultivation in both senses: cultivation of land and cultivation of taste. Yet the quieter Roman garden may be more restful to imagine. A modest courtyard with a few beds, a fig tree against a wall, pots of herbs, a small basin catching rainwater or fed by a household supply, a bench in shade, the smell of rosemary warming in the sun, the sound of sandals on stone. The Romans also valued the relationship between garden and meal. Herbs seasoned sauces, vegetables, legumes, fish, and meats. Garlands and flowers appeared at banquets. Dining rooms might open onto gardens, letting guests look out at greenery while reclining. In warm weather, meals could take place outdoors, under pergolas, or in garden rooms. One Roman garden feature that echoes through later history is the enclosed, inward-looking green space. The peristyle courtyard, with rooms around and sky above, becomes one ancestor of later cloisters, patios, and domestic courtyards. It creates a protected middle, neither fully indoors nor fully outdoors, a place of transition, air, and calm. Roman wall paintings of gardens are especially moving because they show a desire to dwell among plants even when real space was limited. Painted birds perch on painted branches. Painted fences recede into painted groves. The illusion is gentle. It says, "Let the wall become a garden too. Let the eye rest where the body cannot go." As Roman power changed and the Western Empire transformed, many garden practices continued in altered forms. Knowledge passed through households, rural estates, monastic communities, medical traditions, and texts copied by hand. Plants do not follow political boundaries neatly. Rosemary continues to root. Mint escapes its bed. Vines climb whatever support is offered. The living continuity of gardens often outlasts the institutions that describe them. In the Roman courtyard, we find a lasting image, an inner space open to the sky, held by architecture, softened by leaves. It is a room made of air. It invites walking slowly around the edge, pausing at a fountain, touching a herb leaf between finger and thumb, and noticing how the scent remains for a while after the plant is released. Chapter 6: Persian Gardens and the Fourfold Pattern. Among the most influential garden traditions in world history is the Persian garden. Its forms changed across centuries and regions, but certain ideas remained especially powerful. Enclosure, water, shade, fruit trees, symmetry, and the division of space into ordered parts. The Persian garden was not merely a planted area. It was an idealized landscape, a carefully made refuge of coolness and abundance. The old Persian word pairidaēza referred to an enclosure, a walled space. From it came words that eventually entered Greek and other languages, contributing to the later idea of paradise. This etymology is often mentioned because it reveals something central. Paradise, in this tradition, is first of all an enclosed garden, a protected place where water flows, trees give shade, and life is arranged in harmony. In the arid and semi-arid landscapes of Iran and Central Asia, water was precious. Persian garden design often depended on sophisticated water management, including canals, underground channels that carried water from higher ground to settlements and fields. By the time water appeared in a garden channel or pool, it had already traveled through careful engineering and patient maintenance. The Chahar Bagh, or Fourfold garden, became a celebrated pattern. In its ideal form, the garden was divided by water channels or paths into 4 parts. The crossing lines could meet at a pool or pavilion. This structure was both practical and symbolic. It allowed irrigation, movement, and visual order. It also suggested completeness, a world divided and balanced, with water at its center. Persian gardens often included fruit trees such as pomegranates, apricots, peaches, quinces, and citrus where climate allowed, along with plane trees, cypresses, roses, and fragrant plants. The combination of evergreen cypress and flowering or fruiting trees created both permanence and seasonal change. One tree stands dark and steady, another blossoms, fruits, drops leaves, and begins again. The garden was a place of poetry. Persian literature is rich with images of roses, nightingales, cypresses, flowing water, springtime, and shaded pavilions. These images became symbolic and emotional, but they were also rooted in real sensory experience. In a dry climate, the sound of running water is not a small luxury. It is comfort, wealth, care, and relief. Persian garden might be set within high walls, entered through a gate, and organized along a central axis. From the entrance, one could see water leading the eye inward. A pavilion might stand at the center or at one end, offering a place to sit and look out. The garden was designed not only for walking, but for viewing from shaded architecture. It could be experienced as a sequence of framed scenes. The walled nature of the Persian garden is important. The wall does not merely exclude, it intensifies. It makes the interior more distinct. Outside may be dust, heat, and distance. Inside, there is water, shade, and ordered planting. The garden becomes a contrast, a held breath, a pause. As Persian cultural influence spread, garden ideas traveled east and west. Islamic garden traditions, Mughal gardens in South Asia, Ottoman gardens, and later European interpretations all drew, in different ways, from Persian models. The fourfold plan, the central water channel, the pavilion, and the symbolism of enclosed abundance continued to inspire designers for centuries. But the Persian garden was never only a diagram. Its geometry was softened by leaves, scent, birds, and time. Water channels gathered fallen petals. Fruit ripened unevenly. Shadows moved across paths. The same garden looked different in spring, summer, autumn, and winter. The formal plan made a frame within which seasonal life could unfold. Imagine resting in such a garden near evening. The walls hold the last warmth of the day. Water moves in a narrow channel, making a sound so steady it becomes almost like silence. The cypress trees are dark shapes against a fading sky. Somewhere, roses release their scent. A pavilion offers shade, but the whole garden has begun to cool. The paths divide the space clearly, yet the air feels soft. The Persian garden gives us one of history's most enduring images of cultivated peace. A walled enclosure where water is guided with care, where fruit trees grow in ordered beds, and where the world seems, for a time, balanced around the quiet crossing of paths. Chapter 7: Islamic Courtyards, Scented Plants, and Water in Shade. With the spread of Islamic civilization across the Middle East, North Africa, Spain, Central Asia, and beyond, garden traditions mingled and flourished. Persian, Roman, Byzantine, local, and regional practices all contributed to a rich variety of gardens and courtyards. These spaces appeared in palaces, houses, mosques, madrasas, hospitals, and urban dwellings. Again and again, one finds the same restful elements: enclosure, water, shade, fragrance, and patterned order. In Islamic architecture, the courtyard became a central form. In hot climates, an inward-facing building around an open court offered privacy, ventilation, and relief from the sun. A courtyard might contain a fountain, a basin, trees, or potted plants. Even when paved, it could feel garden-like because of water and shade. The sky formed the ceiling, walls held the space, arcades softened the edges. Water was both practical and aesthetic. Fountains cooled the air slightly, reflected light, and provided sound. Narrow channels carried water through gardens, dividing beds and guiding the eye. Pools mirrored architecture, doubling arches and columns in trembling reflection. In the quietest courtyards, water did not need to leap or roar. A small jet, a steady trickle, or a still basin could shape the entire atmosphere. Fragrance was highly valued. Roses, jasmine, orange blossom, myrtle, basil, mint, and other aromatic plants appeared in various regions. A garden could be known by scent as much as by sight. In the evening, when heat softened, fragrance became more noticeable. A courtyard planted with jasmine or citrus could become a gentle chamber of perfume. In Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, gardens and courtyards reached extraordinary refinement. The Alhambra in Granada and the Generalife Gardens preserve, though altered by time, some of the most famous examples. There, water channels, courtyards, clipped planting, arcades, and views of the surrounding landscape create a sequence of intimate and open spaces. The Court of the Myrtles, with its long reflecting pool, and the Court of the Lions, with its central fountain, show how water and architecture can create calm through proportion. Gardens of Al-Andalus also influenced later Spanish patios and courtyard traditions. A whitewashed wall, a tiled floor, a fountain, pots of geraniums or herbs, and a citrus tree in a courtyard all belong to this long inheritance. The patio is not merely decorative, it is climatic wisdom. It makes a house breathe. Islamic medicine and botany also contributed greatly to plant knowledge. Scholars translated, preserved, critiqued, and expanded earlier Greek, Roman, Persian, and Indian knowledge. Physicians and botanists such as Ibn Sina, known in Latin as Avicenna, and Ibn al-Badr wrote about medicinal substances, including many plants. Herb gardens were connected with hospitals and teaching institutions. Plants moved through trade networks, and so did words, recipes, and methods of distillation. Distillation is part of the sensory history of gardens. Rosewater, orange blossom water, and other aromatic extracts became important in cuisine, medicine, hygiene, and hospitality. The scent of a garden could be captured briefly in a bottle or bowl. To sprinkle rosewater was to bring the garden indoors. Islamic gardens often carried spiritual symbolism, especially in relation to descriptions of gardens in the Quran: flowing water, shade, fruits, and peace. Yet the actual historical gardens were also practical and social places. They offered respite, conversation, study, and beauty. Their symbolism did not remove them from daily life. Rather, it deepened the meaning of ordinary pleasures: cool water, green shade, ripe fruit. The courtyard in this world is a profound architectural idea. It turns the building inward, creating a protected emptiness. That emptiness can then be filled with light, sound, scent, and plants. It does not require vast space. Even a small courtyard can hold a fountain and a few pots. Even a narrow shaft of sky can change the feeling of a home. Picture a courtyard in the late afternoon. The sun no longer reaches the whole floor. A small fountain repeats itself. Mint grows in a pot near the water. The tiles are cool in the shaded areas. A citrus tree stands in one corner, its leaves glossy and dark. Above, swallows cross the square of sky. The surrounding rooms are quiet. The courtyard gathers the day and slows it. Through Islamic garden traditions, the old idea of the enclosed green refuge continued to travel. It entered poetry, architecture, medicine, and domestic life. It reminds us that a garden need not be large to be complete. If it has water, shade, scent, and a sense of inward calm, it can become a whole world. Chapter 8: Monastery Gardens and the Patient Herb Bed. In medieval Europe, monastery gardens became important centers of cultivation, medicine, and plant knowledge. Monasteries varied greatly by region, wealth, climate, and order, but many included practical gardens, vegetable plots, orchards, vineyards, infirmary gardens, and cloister gardens. These spaces supported daily life and spiritual practice. They were places of work, study, healing, and contemplation. The cloister is one of the most enduring forms of the walled courtyard. Typically, it consisted of a square or rectangular open garden surrounded by covered walkways. The cloister connected church, dormitory, refectory, chapter house, and other monastic spaces. Monks could walk there in silence, read, pray, or move between duties, sheltered from rain and sun. At the center might be grass, herbs, a tree, a well, or a simple cross. The cloister garden was enclosed, but not cut off from the sky. It created a rhythm of inwardness. The covered walk offered shade and repetition, column, arch, column, arch. The open center allowed light, weather, and growing things. It was a garden meant as much for quiet passage as for lingering. Monastic herb gardens were often associated with the infirmary. In a world where medicine relied heavily on plants, the cultivation of herbs was a serious responsibility. Sage, rue, fennel, mint, betony, hyssop, lavender, horehound, comfrey, chamomile, dill, and many other plants appeared in medieval medical and culinary traditions. Some were grown for teas, salves, poultices, flavoring, strewing, or symbolic use. One famous plan, the 9th century plan of St. Gall, shows an idealized monastery layout with many garden areas. An herb garden near the physician's house, a vegetable garden, an orchard that also served as a cemetery, and other cultivated spaces. Whether or not it was built exactly as drawn, the plan shows how carefully gardens were integrated into monastic life. Medieval herbals preserved and transformed plant knowledge from classical, local, and monastic sources. Manuscripts copied descriptions of plants, their properties, and uses. Illustrations varied from highly stylized to increasingly naturalistic over time. These books were not modern scientific botany, but they represent centuries of attention. A plant's shape, smell, taste, and effects were all part of how it was known. The herb bed itself was a patient place. Many herbs are modest in appearance. Sage has soft, gray-green leaves. Thyme is low and woody. Lavender forms narrow leaves and purple flowers beloved by bees. Fennel rises feathery and tall. Mint spreads eagerly if not contained. Chamomile makes small daisy-like flowers. None of these plants demand grandeur. They ask for sun, drainage, water at the right time, and cutting back. Monastic gardens also supplied the kitchen. Medieval diets varied widely, but vegetables, legumes, fruits, and herbs were essential. The kitchen garden might include leeks, onions, garlic, cabbage, beans, peas, parsley, and other greens. Fruit trees could provide apples, pears, plums, cherries, walnuts, and more depending on region. Vines grew where climate allowed. Bees provided honey and wax. The monastery garden combined labor and contemplation. Digging, pruning, watering, gathering, drying, and storing were repetitive tasks. Repetition can be wearying, but it can also be calming. Monastic practice, manual labor had spiritual value. To tend a bed of herbs was not separate from the rhythm of prayer. It belonged to the same ordered day. We should imagine these gardens with their seasons. In early spring, beds are cleared and shoots appear. In summer, herbs are cut and hung to dry. Bees move through lavender and hyssop. In autumn, fruit is gathered, roots are lifted, seeds are saved. In winter, the garden is quieter, but jars, bundles, and dried leaves preserve its memory indoors. The walled nature of the monastery intensified its gardens. Within the precinct, life followed a rule. Bells marked hours. Paths connected duties. Gardens supplied the body while the cloister steadied the mind. The enclosure did not make the garden lifeless, it made it attentive. A medieval infirmary garden at dusk might be especially peaceful to imagine. Beds edged with boards or low wattle. A narrow path between them. Sage, rue, and lavender giving off their scent as the air cools. A monk cutting a small bundle of herbs, not hurried. Somewhere nearby, a bell sounds not loudly, but enough to mark the hour. The work pauses, then continues another day. In monastery gardens, the history of herbs becomes a history of care. Care for the sick, care for the kitchen, care for the written page, care for the daily round of tending. Their legacy survives in herb gardens, cloisters, botanical study, and the deep association between enclosed green spaces and quiet thought. Chapter 9: Medieval Courtyards, Cottage Gardens, and the Enclosed Garden of the Imagination. Beyond monasteries, medieval gardens appeared in castles, manor houses, towns, and cottages. Some were practical, some symbolic, some places of leisure. The idea of the enclosed garden, or hortus conclusus, became especially meaningful in medieval art and literature. It could represent purity, contemplation, and spiritual inwardness, but it also reflected real garden forms: walls, gates, turf seats, flowers, herbs, and fruit trees. A medieval castle or manor might include several kinds of gardens. There could be a kitchen garden for vegetables and herbs, an orchard, a vineyard where climate allowed, and a pleasure garden for walking, music, games, or quiet conversation. Enclosure was important. Walls, hedges, fences, and ditches protected plants from animals and marked private space. The pleasure garden of the later Middle Ages often included turf benches, flowery meads, trellised vines, arbors, and fountains. It was a place for refined leisure, especially in courtly literature. Roses, lilies, violets, irises, and gillyflowers might be cultivated for beauty and scent. Herbs such as thyme, marjoram, and mint might grow among or near flowering plants. The word garden in many European languages is related to enclosure. A garden is, historically, a guarded place. This does not necessarily mean a severe boundary. A hedge can be soft and alive. A fence can be simple, but the boundary matters. It says, within this space, something is being tended. Cottage gardens were less documented than elite gardens, but they were vital. Around cottages and small houses, people grew vegetables, herbs, and flowers in mixed plantings. The separation between useful and beautiful was often not strict. A plant might feed bees, flavor stew, scent linens, help with household remedies, and brighten a doorway. Marigolds, roses, lavender, rosemary, sage, parsley, leeks, onions, beans, and cabbages could all belong to a small domestic world. The medieval town courtyard also had its own quiet role. In crowded towns, open space behind or within houses was precious. A courtyard might hold a well, a workshop, animals, storage, herbs in pots, or a small tree. It was rarely an ideal garden, but it could still be a green relief. Urban gardening has always depended on making use of small spaces: a wall, a ledge, a barrel, a patch of soil. In medieval art, the enclosed garden often appears as a serene, symbolic space. A low wall surrounds flowers. Figures sit calmly on the grass. The garden is not wild forest, nor open field, but a protected middle realm. It is intimate, ordered, and meaningful. Even when the symbolism is religious, the details are lovingly earthly: petals, leaves, birds, benches, fountains. Herbs in medieval life were also part of household atmosphere. Floors might be strewn with rushes and aromatic plants, though practices varied by time and place. Lavender could scent linen. Rosemary was associated with remembrance and used in many customs. Sage was valued enough to inspire sayings about health and wisdom. Mint cooled and freshened. Fennel flavored food and appeared in remedies. Garden tools were simple: spades, hoes, pruning knives, baskets, watering pots. Much work was done by hand. Soil was amended with manure and composted matter. Seeds were saved, exchanged, and carried. Plant varieties were local, shaped by climate and custom. A garden's success depended less on novelty than on knowing what had worked before. The medieval garden invites us to slow down because its scale is often human and close. A raised bed, a woven fence, a gate that creaks, a bench made of turf and flowers, a pear tree trained against a warm wall, a narrow path worn by repeated walking. It is not a landscape to be consumed in one glance. It is a place of small tasks. In the evening, a medieval enclosed garden might gather many scents at once. Damp earth, roses, crushed thyme, smoke from a distant hearth, perhaps hay from nearby fields. The wall holds the warmth. Birds settle. A few tools are put away. The gate is closed, not in fear, but in completion. The day's work in the garden is done. The hortus conclusus, the enclosed garden of imagination, continues to speak because it gives shape to inward calm. It suggests that peace can be cultivated within limits. A wall does not have to mean separation from the world. It can mean attention to a smaller world. Within that smaller world, a person may notice the opening of a flower, the ripening of fruit, or the steady growth of herbs that ask for little and give much. Chapter 10. Renaissance, not gardens, physic gardens, and the ordering of plants. During the Renaissance, European gardens changed in many ways. Classical texts were studied with renewed interest. Travel expanded plant knowledge, and wealthy patrons commissioned increasingly elaborate designs. Geometry became more visible. Gardens were planned with axes, terraces, parterres, fountains, sculptures, and carefully clipped forms. At the same time, practical herb gardens and physic gardens continued to develop, linking beauty with study and medicine. A knot garden is one of the most recognizable forms of Renaissance and early modern garden design. Low hedges, often of box, rosemary, lavender, or other clipped plants, were arranged in interlacing patterns like embroidery. The spaces between might be filled with colored earth, gravel, flowers, or herbs. Seen from above, the pattern was clear and intricate. At ground level, it became a series of fragrant edges and narrow paths. Knot gardens show the garden as a kind of living textile. They require regular trimming, careful layout, and patience. Their beauty lies in order, but it is an order that must be maintained against growth. Plants naturally thicken, spread, lean, and seed. The gardener returns with shears and string, restoring the pattern. The result is not static. It is a conversation between design and vitality. Physic gardens, devoted to medicinal plants, became especially important in universities and medical schools. One of the earliest botanical gardens in Europe was established at Pisa in the 16th century, followed by Padua, Florence, Bologna, Leiden, and others. These gardens allowed students to study living plants rather than relying only on dried specimens or manuscript illustrations. The garden became an outdoor classroom. The physic garden arranged plants for identification and teaching. Labels, beds, and classifications gradually became more important. At first, plants might be grouped by medicinal use, region, or traditional categories. Over time, botanical classification developed into a more systematic science. Yet, the early physic garden retained the feel of the herb bed, a place where leaves are touched, smelled, compared, and remembered. Herbals became more detailed in the Renaissance, aided by printing. Works by authors such as Otto Brunfels, Leonhard Fuchs, John Gerard, and Nicholas Culpeper reached wider audiences. These books mixed observation, tradition, medicine, folklore, and increasingly careful illustration. They helped standardize plant knowledge while also preserving local and inherited uses. The 16th and 17th centuries also brought many plants into Europe from the Americas, Asia, Africa, and other regions through trade and exploration. Some became foods, medicines, or ornamentals. The movement of plants was often tied to complex and unequal histories, but in the quiet frame of garden history, we can still notice the botanical result. Gardens became more diverse, and gardeners became more curious. Seeds, bulbs, and cuttings traveled long distances, then had to be coaxed into new soils and climates. Courtyard gardens during this period continued to serve domestic life, especially in Mediterranean and urban settings. In towns, enclosed spaces behind houses became places for herbs, flowers, laundry, storage, and conversation. In grand houses, courtyards could be formal and architectural. In modest homes, they remained practical and intimate. The Renaissance garden often expressed the idea that human reason could order nature. Terraces aligned with buildings. Paths followed geometry. Water features obeyed axes. Plants were clipped into shapes. Yet the best of these gardens still depended on sensory pleasure. The smell of herbs, the shade of arbors, the sound of fountains, the changing light on leaves. A physic garden at the close of day might be especially soothing. Imagine rectangular beds arranged with care, labels written by hand. Students have gone. A few gardeners remain, watering. The leaves of sage, wormwood, balm, and mint are distinct in shape and scent. Bees visit the last flowers. The garden is both a library and a living field. Each plant is a page, but the pages breathe. The Renaissance did not replace older garden meanings, it layered new ones upon them. Gardens remained places of food, medicine, shade, prayer, and rest. But they also became places of study, collection, perspective, and display. The herb bed, once mainly practical, became part of a wider botanical curiosity that would eventually lead to modern science. Still, beneath all the classifications and designs, the gardener's experience remained familiar. Seeds must be sown at the right time. Cuttings may fail. Frost may come late. A plant described in a book may behave differently in a particular soil. The garden teaches humility even while inviting order. Chapter 11: Kitchen Gardens, Colonial Plant Journeys, and the Everyday Courtyard. From the 17th through the 19th centuries, gardens continued to multiply in form and meaning. Grand estates developed formal avenues, landscape parks, glass houses, and collections of exotic plants. Botanical gardens became centers of science and empire. But alongside these large histories, the kitchen garden and courtyard remained essential to ordinary life. The kitchen garden was a working garden. It supplied vegetables, herbs, fruits, and sometimes flowers for the household. In larger estates, it might be hidden behind walls, both to protect crops and to keep the practical work separate from ornamental landscapes. High brick walls absorbed and reflected heat, creating microclimates for fruit trees trained as espaliers. Peaches, pears, apples, and apricots could be grown against warm walls in climates where they might otherwise struggle. A walled kitchen garden is one of the most satisfying historical garden forms. It is orderly, but not purely decorative. Beds are arranged for rotation and access. Paths allow wheelbarrows. Cold frames, compost heaps, tool sheds, and water sources are part of the design. Herbs grow near the entrance or in dedicated beds. Fruit trees line the walls. The whole space is productive, sheltered, and quietly beautiful. The walls are not only boundaries, they are instruments of climate. A south-facing wall in the northern hemisphere stores warmth. It protects blossoms from wind. It allows gardeners to train branches flat, making pruning and harvest easier. The wall turns weather into something slightly more manageable. In urban houses, courtyards and back gardens offered smaller versions of this practicality. A family might keep herbs, a few vegetables, a grapevine, a fig, or potted citrus. In Mediterranean towns, courtyards remained central to domestic cooling and social life. In northern towns, small yards might be crowded but still useful. Herbs are forgiving companions for such spaces. Mint, parsley, chives, thyme, and sage can grow near kitchens, ready to be cut as needed. This period also saw the large-scale global movement of plants. Botanical exploration, trade, colonial expansion, and scientific collecting brought tea, coffee, cacao, tobacco, potatoes, tomatoes, maize, peppers, rubber, and countless ornamental plants into new contexts. Some became staples far from their original homes. Some transformed cuisines and economies. Some were grown in botanical gardens before entering farms and kitchens. It is important to approach this history gently but honestly. Plant journeys were often entangled with human hardship, forced labor, unequal power, and the extraction of wealth. Yet in the quiet story of gardens, we can focus on the plants themselves without ignoring that their movement was not always innocent. A tomato in a kitchen garden, a potato in a field, a pelargonium in a pot, a tea plant in a plantation. all carry histories of travel and adaptation. Herbs also traveled. Basil, originally associated with regions of Asia and Africa, became beloved in Mediterranean cooking. Coriander moved widely across continents. Rosemary, lavender, and thyme spread through gardens beyond their native ranges. Plants became naturalized into new cuisines and customs. What feels traditional in one place may have arrived centuries earlier from another. The 19th century brought a growing interest in cottage gardens as picturesque and sentimental spaces. Mixed plantings of flowers, herbs, vegetables, and fruit trees came to be admired for their informal abundance. While idealized images often softened the realities of rural labor, the cottage garden itself remained a place of skill. To grow much in a small space requires knowledge, succession planting, saving seed, composting, pruning, sharing cuttings, and using every corner. Glass houses and conservatories changed what could be grown in colder climates. Citrus trees, pineapples, orchids, palms, and tender herbs could be kept alive under glass with heat and care. For the wealthy, this became a form of display. For botanists, it allowed study. For gardeners, it meant new labor, managing temperature, ventilation, watering, pests, and light. Yet the simplest courtyard still held its old wisdom. A pot of basil near the kitchen, a rosemary bush by a wall, a bench under a vine, a rain barrel, a patch of parsley, a cat asleep in shade. The continuity of garden life is often found in such ordinary scenes. The kitchen, garden, and courtyard remind us that history is not only made in famous places, it is also made in repeated gestures. Sowing beans, tying a branch, cutting thyme, saving onion seed, sweeping a path, filling a watering can. These gestures have been performed by people whose names were not written down, but whose knowledge shaped daily survival and comfort. At evening in a walled kitchen garden, the day's work settles. Tools lean against a shed. The brick walls glow with stored warmth. The smell of tomato leaves, damp soil, parsley, and cut grass mingles in the air. A gate closes softly. Tomorrow there will be more watering, more weeding, more ripening. The garden is never finished, and that is part of its peace. Chapter 12. Modern restorations, balcony herbs, and the garden as memory. In the modern world, gardens have taken countless forms. There are public parks, botanical gardens, community gardens, allotments, rooftop gardens, school gardens, therapeutic gardens, restored historic gardens, suburban yards, balcony planters, and windowsill herbs. Some are large and carefully funded. Others are improvised from containers, recycled buckets, and a little available light. The history of walled courtyards and herb gardens continues in these modern spaces, even when the walls are apartment blocks and the courtyard is shared by many families. The essential elements remain recognizable: enclosure, plants, water, care, and the wish for a small refuge. Historic garden restoration has become an important field. Archaeologists, historians, horticulturists, and gardeners work together to to understand how gardens once looked and functioned. They study old plans, paintings, letters, plant lists, pollen, seeds, soil marks, and surviving walls. Sometimes they replant gardens with historically appropriate species. Sometimes they preserve the structure while allowing modern use. Restoration is always an interpretation, because gardens are living things and cannot be frozen exactly in time. Botanical gardens today continue the work of collection, education, conservation, and display. Many now focus on biodiversity, endangered plants, seed banking, climate change, and public learning. The Physic Garden's old role as a teaching space survives, though its questions have expanded. Instead of only asking what a plant can do for human medicine, modern botanical gardens may also ask how ecosystems survive, how habitats can be restored, and how plant diversity can be protected. Community gardens bring another kind of history forward. In cities, shared plots allow people to grow food, flowers, and herbs while building social ties. Many community gardens are intensely multicultural. One bed may hold collard, another tomatoes, another medicinal herbs from a family tradition, another bitter melon, or chilies, or dill. Seeds carry memory across migration. A plant grown in a new city can connect someone to a former home, a grandparent's cooking, or a climate left behind. Balcony and windowsill herb gardens are modest descendants of ancient household plots. A pot of mint in an apartment is part of the same long story as herbs near a Mesopotamian doorway, or in a medieval kitchen garden. Basil on a windowsill, rosemary in a terracotta pot, chives in a crate, thyme in a sunny corner. These are small acts of nearness. They bring useful green life close to daily routines. Modern courtyard design often returns to old principles. In hot climates, shaded inner courtyards reduce heat and create private outdoor rooms. In dense cities, courtyards bring light and air into housing blocks. A tree in a courtyard can change the mood of an entire building. Water features, where appropriate, add sound and cooling. Vines soften hard surfaces. Planters create layers of growth where soil is limited. Therapeutic gardens and hospital gardens also revive ancient links between plants and healing. Modern research increasingly supports what many traditions have long intuited, that access to green spaces can reduce stress, support recovery, and improve well-being. A garden does not need to cure in order to comfort. Sometimes its work is simply to offer a place where the mind can rest on leaves, light, and the slow pace of growth. Herbs remain especially comforting because they invite touch and scent. To rub a lavender flower, crush a mint leaf, or brush rosemary with the hand is to experience a plant directly. Scent is closely tied to memory. A herb garden can call back kitchens, summers, family meals, old houses, markets, holidays, and quiet afternoons. This is one reason herbs feel so intimate. They enter both food and memory. The modern garden also faces new challenges. Climate change shifts growing zones, alters rainfall, stresses plants, and changes pest patterns. Gardeners are learning to conserve water, choose resilient species, support pollinators, build soil, and reduce chemical use. In some ways, this returns gardening to its oldest skill, close observation. The gardener watches weather, soil, insects, and plant behavior, then adapts. A walled courtyard in the 21st century may look very different from one in ancient Egypt or medieval Europe. It may have concrete walls, a metal chair, a rainwater tank, solar lights, and planters made from reclaimed wood. Yet at dusk, when the air cools and leaves stir, it belongs to the same family. It is still an enclosed outdoor room. It still holds the sky. It still gathers the day into a quieter form. As we reach the end of this sleepy history, we can let the many gardens we have visited settle together. The first protected patches near early homes, the river gardens of Mesopotamia and Egypt, Greek courtyards scented with thyme, Roman peristyles with fountains and painted walls, Persian gardens divided by water channels, Islamic courtyards cooled by shade and scent, monastery herb beds tended with patience, medieval enclosed gardens of flowers and imagination, Renaissance physic gardens arranged for study, walled kitchen gardens glowing with warm brick, modern balconies and community plots carrying memory forward. They are different, but they share a gentle pattern. A boundary is made, water is brought, soil is tended, plants are chosen, shade grows, people return day after day, season after season. They learn what thrives, what fails, what spreads, what needs pruning, what comes back after winter. A garden is history written in leaves, but it is also history written in habits. The habit of watering, the habit of saving seed, the habit of sitting quietly at the end of the day, the habit of noticing that the mint has escaped its pot, that the rosemary has flowered, that the wall is warm, that the courtyard is cooler than the street, that the first star is visible above the roofline. And so, as the screen remains dark and the story grows softer, we can imagine one final courtyard. It belongs to no single century. Its walls are old but well kept. A narrow channel of water moves through the center. There is a small tree, perhaps a fig or a pomegranate. There are pots of basil, mint, and lavender. Thyme grows between stones. A bench waits in the shade. The gate is closed, but not locked. The evening air is mild. Nothing urgent happens here. The garden does not announce itself. It simply continues. Leaves breathe in the dark. Water moves quietly. The herbs keep their scent. The wall holds the last warmth of the day, and then slowly lets it go. This is the long, calm inheritance of gardens, herbs, and walled courtyards, a human wish to make a small place of care beneath the open sky, and to return to it again and again when the day is done.